I've adjusted this face a little bit, cleaned up some of the sculpt, all of that. But I need to emphasize at this point that all of that is going to be very fluid because we don't have skin on this, we don't have muscles on this, and we are starting with just this skull, so we really don't know what this model is going to look like. And I don't want you to get caught up in really making the skull perfect until you've gone through this entire process and you get a sense of what your skull actually looks like, what your face actually looks like, starting from the ground up. So I've just cleaned it up a little bit. And a lot of this cleanup is stuff that you're going to have to do on your own using Visualarium and other references. You've got the basic things intact at this point. So those are the essentials that we need. But now, before we get into musculature, we want to talk a little bit about something kind of new to the anatomical field, for us sculptors anyways. And that's forensic facial reconstruction. The science behind facial reconstruction has given us a lot of tools for understanding facial anatomy, for understanding expression, for understanding just how the face is structured. There are a whole bunch of rules that can be applied to our artwork. One of them that I found really interesting in my research was that you can tell the thickness of the lips with an equation involving the length of the tooth, the front incisors. So we're going to look at that in time. But what we want to do right now is just sketch out a couple of global markers. I'm not going to use any one particular facial reconstruction method. There's still a lot of fluidity in terms of who's right and the evidence behind each approach, things like that. And all of it is really geared towards a much more specific end than we have. For example, facial reconstruction is really about identifying dead bodies for police purposes, things like that. We don't have that same quality. We just want to kind of glean what we can from the science and go from there and just keep sculpting faces. We're going to adjust the face at the end of it anyways. We're not holding steady to the skull. So with that said, we want to talk about a global set of markers for the face, and we want to talk about a global set of measurements. But the first thing that we have to do is we have to set measurements up that are going to be universally applicable to our skull here. So we have to make one assumption off the top of the head, off the bat. We have to decide what is the actual size of this skull in real world units. What would the height of this skull be? It's going to be essential that we do that, and it's more useful if we do that in centimeters. The measurement we're going to go with is somewhere between 6.5 inches and 7.5. So somewhere around here, 6.5 inches to 7.5 inches. And that translates into somewhere around 16.5 centimeters to 19 centimeters. We're going to end up using centimeters because that's where all the forensic data, or how all the forensic data is stored. So you want to be looking and thinking in terms of 4 millimeters, 5 millimeters, things of that nature. So we've got the height, or at least our range, so we're going to go right in the middle. Let's just say 18. So that's going to be the ultimate height that we're going for here. So how do you establish or bring in 18 centimeter unit into ZBrush? Remember, the key thing here is that we make one assumption. You have to make an assumption, and that is that the total height is 18. Once you've made the total height 18, then you're coming into it from a side view. You're going to drag out your action line, and you're going to just make sure that this is all one unit. There we go. Make sure that we've got that line going all the way to the top. Notice how I'm using the top, or the guidelines here for navigation. I'm using those as my guide. So I've got it set all the way up. I'm going to go into the preference palette into transposed units, and we've been here before a couple of times. What we need to do now is set the calibration distance to 18. So this is representing 18 units. From a distance, we're looking and seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, yada yada, all the way to 18. But if we come in and zoom in on, say, the thickness or on the teeth, we can pull this out, and lo and behold, you're now actually seeing millimeter increments. So that is 1 centimeter. And then in between there, we're getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. 10 millimeters for each centimeter. So this is now a real-world situation. We're working with real-world units, quasi-real-world units inside of ZBrush. The key is that our calibration distance was set to 18, and minor ticks, that needs to be set to 10. So the default is that it's set to 10. Just make sure you set calibration distance when the entire height of the skull is intact. Okay, now the next thing that I need to do is go in and establish the points where this is going to be, where we're going to place the forensic markers. We're going to do that with poly painting. It's fairly straightforward. We just want to make sure that the brush icon is on. We're going to select the standard brush. We're going to make sure the standard brush is selected. RGB is on, Z-add is off. We're going to select this alpha, 14, and the drag dot stroke. Set your color to black. If any of the subtools change their color, just come in and turn that on for the individual one. Okay, and we need to now be thinking about where we're going to place these. So let's start off with a little bit of an overview of where we're going to place these and why. The first place we're going to put them is right here at the what they call the anterior most point of the glabella. Just means that this is the point that is farthest forward. Okay, then you want to put one right where the nasal bone and the glabella are changing their planes. And you're going to put one right at the tip of the nasal ridge, right as it transitions into the cartilage. Okay, then we're going to continue this line, this halfway line, up, and place another point right at the top, or right where the superciliary arch gives way to the forehead. This is actually also called the most anterior point of the forehead being the part above the brow, and usually pretty low down. That's the highest point. In some people that actually might recess here and then you get another bump, but that's not all that common. All right, we need to place or just keep this line going. And we're going to place another one in the middle of the frontal eminence. And then I'm going to draw some lines outwards, horizontally. And then also correspond those lines with the halfway point of the eye on both sides. We're going to put markers in for these guys as well. They're just coming out along the middle of the frontal eminence and then halfway to the orbit of the eye. We're also going to put points at the highest point of the superciliary arch. Those are usually above the glabella, but they're definitely out. The superciliary arch, remember, sits on top of the glabella. So make sure they're out and they're the farthest most point, wherever that's going to be. We want to place a point around the frontal process of the maxilla, also just what they call the infraorbital. We want to place a point along the zygomatic bone, right where it's transitioning from side to front. We're going to place a point here on the coronoid process. Doesn't have to be specific, and the angle. Again, we're not using an absolute forensic methodology here. What we're doing is using their science to help us understand the structure of the face. And so we really just need points that are going to help us triangulate data. So frontal process of the maxilla, where the cheek turns, zygomatic bone, the jaw along the coronoid process, the angle of the jaw. These next two are really neat, so keep these in mind. They're in the middle of the second molar, top and bottom. They do a lot to really help you understand how thick the jaw is going to be coming from the sides. And they're going to be pointing out towards the side. We're going to also get right below the nose and right above the teeth, but again, still following that halfway point. We're going to do the same thing on the bottom, right between the two incisors, right as they turn, as the skeleton gives way to the teeth. We're going to put another marker right here. Lip chin fold. Not the technical term, but that's one of the terms that they call it. And that's right as it changes its planar direction. We're going to put another marker up here at the chin, and this is going to calculate how thick the mentalis is. So we really want to have that in place. And then another one down here. This one is going to be facing downwards. And the point of this is to start to describe the thickness of the skin post the mentalis, or below the mentalis, after the mentalis. All right, almost done. We need another one. And this one is going to be called, or is coming from, the canine fossa, as they say. And this is another one that is heading forward. So these guys are heading off to the side. Canine fossa is heading forward. The mentalis is kind of upwards and forwards. Bottom of the chin is downwards and forwards. And the zygomatic is pretty much heading out along what we would call the normal. So it's really facing us right now. It's exactly facing us. Mentalis, pretty much along the normal, so it's a little bit off to the side, but kind of facing us. The frontal process there. All right, the rest of this we don't really need to find anything, although they do put markers here along the mid-zygomatic, and then right at the ear hole. So we'll go ahead and put those in. Those will actually be the last ones. What we're not going to do is put one in here, the temporalis. It's not really all that essential. The reason why is because the brow here, frontocephenoidal process of the zygomatic itself, the zygomatic arch, they all form a really nice triangulation of the form. So you can't go wrong in any major way. That's not the muscle what I'm drawing. That's just the simple straight plane that gets filled in there. Some other general rules that we're going to have regarding the face. The skin along the upper portion of the face is going to be roughly, and this is roughly, it's going to be 5 millimeters thick. That's just the beginning measurement for us here. I don't want to get stuck in 4.7 or 6.2. So let's say it's 5 millimeters. Varies depending on whether or not it's the forehead or whether or not it's the nose. It's really thin right here as the nose transitions into the cartilage. That's actually closer to 1 millimeter, they say, 1 to 2 millimeters, where the nasal bone gives way to the glabella. Sometimes you're looking at 6. You know, there's some variations there. The frontal or the upper part of the face, the cranial portion, averaging about 5 millimeters. The lower portion, and that means not just the crane or the mandible area, but that includes the lower part or the cheek, or let's just say the muzzle of the mouth, as well as the jaw and chin and angle of the jaw. These are going to average about 10 millimeters. We're going to kind of just keep that within, well, how do I say it? We're going to keep that with a grain of salt. The jaw here is going to sometimes be closer to 20 millimeters or 17 millimeters, depending on how where you want to get your measurement from. The lips are going to average somewhere between 9 and 12. But again, we're going to get the thickness of the lips from the height of the teeth, which is going to be kind of cool. And then the canine fossa, that's going to be especially deep, depending on the person's infraorbital triangle. So there's going to be this triangle that we describe in time, which takes up all of that canine fossa and helps to keep the face plane really nice, and is part of our aesthetic of beauty. Clint Eastwood, very handsome, but his infraorbital triangle is almost non-existent. His face really conforms to the skull here. So not all beauty fitting to that. But with that done and said, we now want to place those markers on our skull. We're going to start with poly painting, and then we're going to use that poly painting to mesh extract out little forensic markers. Pretty fast, but a really cool way to get this done.